have the First Amendment that there will be no law infringing the freedom of speech, and that has been defended again and again and again, even in terms of noxious opinion. And so if you're saying, Spencer, that the UN wants to criminalize this opinion, wants to make it impossible for us to speak about the motives and goals of our enemy, you got no worries, because the First Amendment will keep that from ever coming to the United States. Well, I wish that were so. And I don't think that it is alarmist, however, to note a few things. In the first place, hate crime laws. The Obama-Biden administration has very clearly come out in favor of tough new hate crime laws. Now, what's a hate crime? If I come down off the podium and I slug this guy, that's a crime. But if I call him a nasty name when I slug him, that's a hate crime. It's exactly the same thing. He stings just as bad if I hit him, probably not that bad. But it's a hate crime if I call him a name. Now, nobody here would defend using racial slurs or getting into this kind of gutter talk. And there is no defense for that at all. The problem is that hate, how do you define that? It's very elastic. And ultimately, it becomes a tool in the hands of the powerful in order to silence those who dissent from their policies. Because you see, the people in power can define anything they want to as hate, and it becomes far beyond racial slurs or obnoxious talk into political dissent. And if you think that that can't happen, well, note, for example, that the Organization of the Islamic Conference has been spearheading efforts for years now to classify honest talk about the Islamic motives and the Islamic goals of the Islamic terrorists, in their own words, to classify that as hate speech on the part of counterterror analysts when they quote it. That's why Geert Wilders is in trouble. And so if what he's doing by reporting on Islamic hate preachers is hate speech in itself, although the hate preachers themselves are not committing hate speech, well then, if you can bring hate crime laws into the United States, it inevitably will bring hate speech into it, because that's how you decide what's a hate crime and what's just an ordinary run-of-the-mill crime. And so if you bring hate speech laws into the United States, you're already introducing very crucial exceptions into the First Amendment. And a pliant Supreme Court could very easily, I don't think it's at all hard to imagine, a Supreme Court ruling that certain kinds of hate speech are not protected by the First Amendment. And if honest talk about the Islamic Jihad is hate speech, then we are mute and defenseless before our enemies. You can't beat an enemy you can't understand and refuse to talk about and don't even know why he's doing what he's doing. Can't be done. And you think this can't happen? Well, let me tell you another little detail. One of the first things Barack Obama did after he became president was write a letter to Ekmeladini Sanolu, the Secretary General of the Organization of the Islamic Conference. And he said, I know we can work together. I think we've got a glorious future together. Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. And he invited Ekmeladini Sanolu to the White House. And he came recently, a few weeks ago. And he said, you ought to appoint, Mr. President, a special liaison from the White House to the Islamic communities. And Barack Obama said, yes, sir, and he did. He appointed, the appointment was announced while Isanolu was in the White House. And so the significance of that is that he seems to be very anxious to do the OIC's bidding. And the OIC is very anxious to restrict free speech about the Islamic Jihad. And the Obama administration is also very anxious to bring hate crimes laws into the United States. It's not hard to see where we could be in another couple of years. And this is a real threat. And so the main thing that I wish to leave with you this morning is that it is an indispensable foundation of a free society to have the possibility of dissent. And it is extraordinarily unpopular. It is out of favor in the administration. It is out of favor in the State Department. It is out of favor in the mainstream media. It is only at a few places like this where we are right now that the honest truth about the Islamic Jihad and the motives and goals of the jihad terrorists can still even be said. But it must be said, or we have no hope of combating it. It must be said, or the Islamic jihadists will be able to advance unimpeded, not understood, not challenged. Omar Ahmed, who was the co-founder and longtime board chairman of a well-known group called the Council on American Islamic Relations, said to a Muslim audience in 1998, without knowing that a non-Muslim reporter was present, he said, "Islam isn't in America to be equal to any other faith, but to become dominant. The Quran should be the highest authority in America, and Islam the only accepted religion on earth." Now I ask you to envision the kind of society that would come to the United States if Omar Ahmed got his wish. You think, well, that's preposterous. That couldn't happen. Don't kid yourself. If we do not fight and stand up for our freedoms now, there's nothing more certain than that we'll lose them. And the reality is, sorry, that's not the end, but very close. The reality is that probably would have been a good ending, you're right. Next time. The society that they want to see here, all you have to do is look at the international news to see what kind of a society it would be. You can look at the fact that in Iraq, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in Nigeria, and elsewhere, women who are not even Muslims have been threatened with death for refusing to cover their hair with a scarf. You have the absolute criminalization. People talk about, well, Islam can be reformed, right? Yeah, Islam can be reformed. Sure, anything can be reformed. Anything can change. Let me tell you the story very briefly of Mahmoud Muhammad Taha, who was a Muslim reformer, who offered a new understanding of the Quran that would neutralize its violent passages and emphasize its peaceful ones. And he was executed for heresy by the Sudanese government in 1985. If the hate speech and the hate speech laws and freedom of speech restrictions come to the United States, that kind of thing we could be seeing here. It seems preposterous, it seems outlandish, but we have a government right now that is very hospitable to this kind of point of view. This is the kind of society that we are facing, and this is what we have to stand up and defend now, or there is no doubt that this effort will continue unimpeded. And so it is absolutely imperative for all of you, wherever you are and with whatever resources you have, in the first place to draw attention to the attacks on the freedom of speech that are going on from the organization of the Islamic Conference, to draw attention to the Wilders case, to draw attention to other attempts to restrict honest speech about Islam and jihad, and to draw attention to the disastrous elements of the Obama administration's policy in refusing to speak honestly or to analyze or to understand our enemy. The situation is very grave, and I think there's nothing more certain than that when we come back here in a year, if I see you then, that we will be able to say we have already seen the bitter fruits of these policies, but you are the ones who have the power wherever you are and whatever way you can to stand up and begin to resist now. And if you do not, every minute the Islamic Jihad is nonetheless advancing. If so far as we may work or may not work, they are working hard. And we have to stand up and resist and maintain ourselves as a free people, or we will no longer be a free people. Thank you. Yes, sir.